A Silkworm of One's Own, Points of View Stitched on the Other Veil by Jacques Derrida. Toward Buenos Aires, November 24th to 29th, 1995. Cero to Amoi. So late have I loved thee. Before the verdict, my verdict, but before befalling me, it drags me down with it in its fall, before it's too late. Stop writing. Full stop. Period. Before it's too late. Go off to the ends of the earth like a mortally wounded animal. Fasting, retreat, departure, as far as possible. Lock oneself away with oneself, in oneself. Try finally to understand oneself, alone and oneself. Stop writing here, but instead from afar, defy a weaving yes from afar, or rather see to its diminution. Childhood memory, raising their eyes from the woolen threads, but without stopping or even slowing the movement of their agile fingers. The women of my family used to say, sometimes I think, that they had to diminish. Not undo, I guess, but diminish. I.e., though I had no idea what the word meant then, but I was all the more intrigued by it, even in love with it, that they needed to diminish the stitches or reduce the knit of what they were working on. And for this diminution, needles and hands had to work with two loops at once, or at least play with more than one. Which has nothing to do, if I understand right, with the mastery of a royal weaver or with Penelope's ruse, with the métier of weaving unweaving. Not even a question of pretending, as she did one day, to be weaving a shroud by saving the lost threads, les filles perdues, the lost sons, thus preparing a winding sheet of Laertes, king of Ithaca and father of Odysseus, for the very one that Athena rejuvenated by a miracle. Don't lose the thread, that's the injunction that Penelope was pretending to follow, but also pretense or fiction, ruse. I should be grateful to you, young lords, who are courting me, now that King Odysseus is dead, if you could restrain your ardour for my hand till I have done this work, so that the threads I have spun may not be utterly wasted, is a winding sheet of Lord Laertes, when he succumbs to the dread hand of death, that stretches all men out at last. I must not risk the scandal there would be among my countrywomen, here if one who had amassed such wealth were put to rest without a shroud. Whereas in diminution, if I understand aright, the work is not undone. No, nothing is undone, on the contrary, but I would also like, in my own way, to name the shroud and the voyage, but a voyage without return, without a circle or journey around the world in any case, or, if you prefer, a written to life that's not a resurrection, neither the first nor the second, with and without the grand masters of discourse about the resurrection, St. Paul or St. Augustine. My God, so that's all your new work is it neither an Odyssey nor a Testament? No, just the opposite. It is. I'd like to call them to the witness stand, knowing that what they say will always be bigger than the tapestry I'll be trying to sew them into, while pretending to cross through them, for it will be a crossing. And as we're starting to talk in the plane, let's call that crossing a flight, and that tapestry a flying carpet. We're just leaving the West to lose our orientation. Talking music, you can decrescendo, diminuendo, attenuate little by little the intensity of the sound, but also diminish the intervals. Whilst in the language of rhetoric, a little like litotes, like extenuation or reticence, a diminution consists in saying less, sure, but with a view to letting more be understood. But letting thus, and who lets what, who lets who be understood? One can always speak of diminution by diminution, and by this henceforth uncatchable stitching, still let rhetoric appropriate the truth of the verdict. A trope would still in this case be coming to dictate to it this true say, or its veredictum of this verdict that seems to have been at the beginning, like your first word. By virtue of this strange verdict, without truth, without veracity, without veridicity, one would never again reach the thing itself, one would above all never touch it. Wouldn't even touch the veil behind which a thing is supposed to be standing, not even the veil before which we sigh together, before which we are together sighing. For the same cause, a common cause. Ah, how tired we are, how I would like finally to touch veil, the word and the thing thus named, and thing itself and the vocable. I would like not only to see in them, toward them, or through them, the word and the thing, but maintain a discourse about them that would finally touch, in short, a relevant discourse that would say them properly, even if it no longer gives anything to be seen. We'll have to give up touching as much as seeing, and even saying, interminable diminution. For you must know right now, to touch that which one calls veil is to touch everything. You'll leave nothing intact, safe and sound, neither in your culture, nor in your memory, nor in your language, as soon as you take the word veil. As soon as you let yourself be caught up in it, in the word, first of all, the French word, to say nothing yet about the thing, nothing will remain any more. We'll soon see how to undo, or rather diminish. Diminish the infinite, diminish ad infinitum. Why not? That's the task or the temptation, the dream, and always has been. You're dreaming of taking on a braid or a weave, a warp or a woof, but without being sure of the textile to come, if there is one, if any remains, and without knowing if what remains to come will still deserve the name of text, especially if the text in the figure of a textile. But you insist on writing to it, doing without undoing, from afar, yes, from afar, like before life, like after life, on writing to it from a lower corner of the map, right at the bottom of the world, in sight of Tierra del Fuego, in the Magellan Strait, in memory of the caravels, in memory of him for whom everything turned out so badly once he'd gone through the strait. Poor Magellan, you can say that again, because I can still see those caravels. I'm writing to him from afar as if, caught in the sails and pushed toward the unknown, at the point of this extremity, as if someone were waiting for the new Messiah, that is, a happy event, nicknamed the verdict, unbeknownst to everything and everyone, without knowing or being sure of anything. The infinite finite time of a trial that consists less in waiting for this or that verdict than in the strait of an implacable suspicion. And what if you were imposing the duration of this trial on yourself so as not to want what you know you want, or to what you believe you no longer want, that is, the due date of such and such verdict, that one and no other? Not with a view of not wanting what you want, but because you no longer want your wanting, whence the interminable imminence of the verdict. Yes, but the due date of a verdict that would therefore no longer be the revelation of a truth, a verdict without truth, as we were saying, without veracity or veridicity. Yes, but a date that is no longer caught up in the fold or unfolding of a veil, quite differently, still earlier or later. I see him waiting for an event of quasi-resurrection that, for once, therefore, in view of a first and last time, would have nothing to do with an unveiling, nothing to do with what they call a truth, with the dictation of a truth, if you're fixed on that, or with an unburying. What would as if mean from the moment? A revolutionary or messianic moment that was determining the as if on the basis of exemplary phrases such as, "It's as if I were alive," or "It's as if I were dead." What would as if mean then, I ask? To whom would I ever dare address such phrases? Now, in order to start a diminution ad infinitum, you'd have to write to him from the very distant place of this as if. For that, with that in view, you have to wait for the Messiah. As for the imminence of a verdict that unveils nothing consistent, that tears no veil. You poor thing, finishing with the veil will always have been the very moment of the veil, unveiling oneself, reaffirming the veil, in unveiling. It finishes with itself in unveiling, does the veil, and always with a view to finishing off in self-unveiling. Finishing with the veil is finishing with self. Is that what you're hoping for from the verdict? Perhaps, no doubt. I fear so. I hope so. There's no chance of that ever happening, of belonging to oneself enough in some savoir, if you want to play, and of succeeding in turning such a gesture toward oneself. You end up in imminence, and the unveiling will still remain a movement of the veil. Does not this movement always consist in its very consistency, in its texture, in finishing itself off, lifting itself, disappearing, drawing itself aside to let something be seen, or to let it be to let? Yes and no. A signature, if it happens, will have pushed that destiny off, of course. Of course, we have always to remember the other veil, but by forgetting it, where you're expecting something else again, preparing yourself for a form of event without precedent, without Eve, and to keep vigil for the coming of without Eve, vigil over it, see to it that it surprises you. Of course, you will not forget that the temple veil was torn on the death of the Messiah, the other one, the ancestor from Bethlehem, the one of the first or second resurrection, the true false Messiah, who heals the blind, presents himself saying, "I am the truth and the life." the very one in whose name the Christophilical caravels discovered America and everything that followed, the good and the worst. At the moment of his death, the temple veil is supposed to have torn. Shall we say that in tearing thus the veil revealed at last what it ought to hide, shelter, protect? Must we understand that it tore simply as if the tearing finally signed the end of the veil or veiling, a sort of truth laid bare, or rather that it was torn in two, as Matthew and Mark say down the middle, says Luke, which maybe gives two equal veils at the moment that, as the sun goes black, everything becomes invisible. Now this veil, remember, was the one of two veils of Exodus. No doubt the first, made of blue and purple and scarlet, a veil made of fine-twined or twisted linen. Inside it was prescribed to install the Ark of the Testimony. This veil would be for you, says Yahweh to Moses, the separation between the holy and the most holy, between the tabernacle and the tabernacle of tabernacles. The veil tearing down the middle, is that the end of such a separation, of that isolation, that unbelievable solitude of belief? I know of no other separation in the world, or that would be commensurable with that one, analogous, comparable to that one which allows us to think nonetheless every other separation, and first of all the separation that separates from the wholly other. Thanks to a veil given by God, and giving here is ordering, donner c'est ici ordonner. Whether or not this unbelievable separation, belief itself, faith, came to an end with the death of Christ, will it ever be comprehended? Will it ever be comprehensible in the veiled folds of a Greek aletheia? No being, no present, no presentation can here be indicated in the indicative. It was, is, shall be, shall have been of all time, the sentence, the saying of God, his verdict. By God's order is given to give the veil. The veil is the gift, that is, ordered to give. Nothing else, that is. God would thus be the name of what gives the order to give the veil between the holy and the holy of the holies. Now, God, the name of God, distinguishes between the artist or inventor of the veil, on the one hand, the embroiderer on the other. On the one hand, and the embroiderer on the other. Both are men, if I've understood aright, human beings, and men rather than women, but they do not work in the same fashion. Their fashion is different, like their manner, their hands, their handwork, and the place of their work, inside, within the secret, for the artist or the inventor, and almost outside, at the entrance or the opening of the tent for the embroiderer, who remains on the threshold. And that in view of which they work in this way, veil, curtain, drape, is nothing less than the dwelling of God, his dwelling, his ethos, his being there, his sojourn, his halt to come. For me they shall make a sanctuary, I shall dwell in their bosom. He who lives there in this ethos, and this who is also a what, like a third party, is the law, the text of the law. Here in this very place, here where we are, where we're taking ourselves, where we are going, do I understand aright? It would be something else even if the concern remained still to distinguish between the holy and the holy of holies. Will you ever give up on this concern? This concern that Hegel, in the tradition of a Pompey he understood so well, would never really have accepted, concerned as he was to distinguish between the secret of the Jews and the mystery of the gods of Eleusis. Thinking this concern meant also traversing it, transfixing it with truth, going towards something else and ending up forgetting it. An absolute knowledge, savoir, will never accept this unique separation, that in the veiled place of the holy other, nothing should present itself, that there be nothing there, that is, nothing that is present, nothing that is in the present. Truth, if we need it, and if you still care, still seems to wait, in sericulture before the verdict, another figure. Sericulture, you mean the culture of silk? Patience, yes, the culture of the silkworm, and the quite incomparable patience it demands from a manionnier, the sericultivator. What we're going, before the verdict falls, then, at the end of this time, that is like no other, nor even like the end of time, another figure perhaps upsets the whole of history from top to bottom, and upsets even the meaning of the word history. Neither a history of a veil to be lifted or torn, nor the thing, nor the phallus, nor death, of course, that would suddenly show itself at the last coup de théâtre, at the instant of revelation or an unveiling, nor a theorem wrapped up in a shroud or in modesty, neither aletheia nor homoiosis, nor adequatio, nor Entfalung nor Unverborgenheit, nor Erschlossenheit, nor Entdecktheit, nor Übereinstimmung, nor modesty, halt, or reticence, or Verhaltenheit, but another unfigurable figure beyond any holy shroud, the secret of a face that is no longer even a face, if face tells a vision and a story of the eye. Wait without horizon then, and someone else one knows too well, me for example, why not? But come back from so far, from so low, quick or dread, wait for the other who comes to strike down the order of knowledge. Neither known nor unknown, too well known, but a stranger from head to foot, yet to be born. It would be the end of history in this sense. Verdict, end of the end of history. Everything is going to start again, and with no shroud we would know what to do with. More or less than diminished. Enough heritage, dream your caravel, unless the heritage is still looming and expected at this instant, at this point of verdict. You don't believe in it yourself. I'm warning you, you won't escape. Even if the verdict is favourable, that is, negative, at least as for what you will be too quick to nickname aporia, meaning that, well, in any case the veil lifts. It's either or. Either the veil remains a veil, therefore destined to lift, thus following its own movement, and tearing basically changes nothing here, or else you want to undo yourself from it without undoing it, as if you've been claiming for a moment, in which case it still lifts or removes itself. You allow it to sublate itself, se relever, intact or torn, which comes to the same thing. Two liftings then, the one no longer belonging to the other, but because it belongs to the other by belonging to the other. L'une se garde de l'autre. The one toward the other, with a view to the other. Will you be able to interrupt it? You want to have finished with the veil, and no doubt you were finished, but without having finished with it. To have finished with oneself, that's the veil. That's it, just that, itself, in oneself, just where you have finished with it. It will survive you, always. That's why, far from being one veil among others, example or sample, a shroud sums up the essence of the veil. So you haven't stopped trembling since your departure for the other side of the world. You're not trembling because of leaving, but at what is waiting for you on your return. No, because the point is that it is no longer me in question, but what we're here calling the verdict. A still unknown verdict for an indeterminable fault. All the perjuries in the world, blasphemies, profanities, sacrileges. There have been so many. In any case, as for me, I'm lost, but I'd still like it to happen to me, and cause my downfall thus, and not otherwise. Because I feel that the time of this verdict, if I could finally open up a new era, is so paradoxical, twisted, tortuous, against the rhythm, that it could mime the quasi-resurrection of the new year only by sealing forever the so late, too late, in what would not even be a late conversion. A so late, too late sorrow, life will have been so short, a delay I am complaining about, feeling sorry for myself while complaining about it, me plaignant moi-même, or me plaignant de lui, accusing, klagen. But to whom do I make this complaint? Would it suffice to be able to reply to this question for the complaint immediately, to have no further raison d'être? Is it to God? Was it even to Christ that my poor, old, incorrigible Augustine finally addressed this too late, so late, when he was speaking to beauty, Sarita amavi, pulchritudo tam antica et tam nova. So late have I loved thee, beauty so ancient and so new, or rather because it is already late. Late will I have loved thee. A future perfect is wrapped up in the past once late means. As it always does, it's a tautology. So late and too late. There is no lateness in nature, neither in the thing itself, nor in the same general. Late is already said in the comparative, or even the absolute superlative. Late always means later than, or too late absolutely. Before an earlier than objective time, before all metrical knowledge about it, before and rather than noting the chronology of whatever it may be, late evaluates desires, regrets, accuses, complains, and sighs for the verdict. So late, very late, late. Quite simply, ateknos always comes for the time for loving. You were with me and I was not with you. Serita amavi, pulchritudo tam antica et tam nova seretur amavi, et esse intus eras et igofori et ibitur carabam et in ista formosa car fecisti deformi in ruebam, mecum eras et tecum non eram. You were with me, and I was not with you. Will we still recount an eye operation as a story of veils? I know Hélène Cixous, I have known her note the improbable tense of that verb for more than 33 years, but since forever without knowing savoir. I have known her forever without ever knowing what she confides here in savoir, i.e., and this would be feeble hypothesis, today's revelation. The revolution of an avowal at last disarmed, that she could not see. All this time she will have been short-sighted, in truth almost blind to the naked eye up to the day she had an operation, yesterday. The day before she was still blind to the naked eye, I mean blind when she was not wearing her lenses, her own proper lenses, appropriate lenses, or contact lenses, an expression I like to hear in English, in memory of a certain conversation in the mountains. What Hélène Cixous has just confided here, she also confesses it, no doubt, and therefore avows it. But first, virtue in the abyss of such a savoir. The fault she avows was already an avowal, a position of avowal, in which she who almost never says I for herself, had lived until then, and lived without seeing, and especially without knowing what one day, thanks to an unforeseeable piece of eye surgery, she would see without yet knowing what she would see and what seeing would mean. Others would judge that through this avowal of avowal at the moment of seeing, she lifts the veil on a myopia that was both a fault and a veil. Myopia was her fault, her lead, her imperceptible native veil. How can a veil hold on a lead? What does lace mean when we're talking about a veil? Voila the whole question. Every word counts. It holds, touches, pulls like a lead. It affects and sometimes tears the skin. It wounds, it penetrates under the epidermic surface, which a veil never does when it suffices to veil one's gaze. Savoir could be read as a poem of touch. It sings sight like a touch, without intermediary, without non-contact lenses. The continuity of her flesh, the miracle giving, she hadn't realised the day before that eyes are miraculous hands, had never enjoyed the delicate tact of the cornea, the eyelashes, the most powerful hands, these hands that touch imponderably near and far off ears. She had not realised that eyes are lips on the lips of God. Reminding us that blindness placed her in a position of avowal, and that she was the first to accuse herself. There she goes, la voilà, avowing the avowal. She repents of the past avowal as though it were a first fault. In the experience of blindness, avowal was part of the game. It formed a first act of her blindness. The avowal itself was the fault. Voila the sentence. Voila the judgment, another verdict, and one miraculous contemporaneous with the one awaiting me, the sentence, l'arrêt, of a text that thereby turns out to be the most innocent, but also the most cleverly calculated, infinite knowing that carries itself off in an operation, knowing that knows how to lose itself, although it remains infinitely calculated from its title on savoir, and calculated not to play on its force or to show it, but with a view of outplaying it in what it offers. I am indeed playing in my turn with the letters or even the syllables of this title, savoir. Any word, as in so many words, and some of them appear to be visible, others audible, in a skein of shards of words of all sorts. A noun, le savoir, a verb in the infinitive savoir, a demonstrative pronoun, ça, a possessive adjective, ça, punctuation marks, invisible homonyms, and apostrophes, savoir, all that becomes here, only here, in the sentences of this text here, the unique body of an unheard word, more or less than a word, the grammar of a syntagma in expansion. A sentence in suspense that flaps its wings at birth like the silkworm butterfly above the cocoon, that is, the poem. From that height, the mobile of a bewinged signature thus illuminates the body of the text. A bit like the lamp of a hovering helicopter, immobile and throbbing, the flying spotlight looking down, one-eyed lamp watching over the verdict to come. Right on the body of the text without which it would be nothing, not even born, the body of the text, the irreplaceable poem entitled Savoir. Why irreplaceable? Must one give it into praise in this way, like a law of the genre? No, nothing is more foreign in my concern than praise. Just when I am talking from so far away, an evaluation. No, this irreplaceability depends on its poetic act, of course, but specifically where it allows itself also to be ruled, held back, never letting itself let go, by the lead of a referent, an event, the operation, which precisely no longer depended on her. She was operated, not operating in it. A sort of accident, and such a dangerous one, which took place for her alone, and once only. The instant of this irreplaceable operation, hers this time, the poetic one, will in return have cut into language with a laser. That instant will have moved, burned, wetted, then cut up the old new French language, the well-beloved language whose inheritors we are, but also the thieves, the usurpers, the spies, the secret agents, the colonized colonizers, the artisans, the obscure weavers deep in their shop, for it owes everything to us. Does French language, she to whom we owe even more at the moment we get into it, that is, à savoir. Her avowal of avowal gives us food for reading, food for thought suddenly, or for dreaming something that's obvious. This pre-operatory vigilance is what will have borne an immense poetic corpus, which I thought I knew and which I persist in thinking has not yet been read, nor point recognised in this century. Ill known especially in this country for reasons that, if brought out, would reveal everything that, in this century, and especially in this country, is forbidden. Before this avowal of avowal, my blind friend had hidden from me that very thing that she could not see, point. Not without glass or lens, the one I hold, and it doesn't date from today, for the most far-seeing among us poets, the one in whom I read foreseeing thought, prophecy and language, in more than one language with the French language, where we know that's our secret, what it can mean to lose one's Latin. She had not told me the secret of her every day, and nor had I seen it, or seen it coming. And yet what she declares today has nothing to do with revelation or unveiling. This event belongs to a quite different space. It comes following a different order, that order under which falls to what I am calling the verdict. It is neither a torn cloth, nor a lifted curtain, nor a split veil. But would you dare claim that it is not still hung between the holy and the holy of holies? Who knows? Perhaps we have to dare indeed. As for the verdict, thus suspended, what we ought to risk will always depend on a perhaps. The fulgurating newness of this day depends, or tends. Toward whom or what I know not yet, but it tends and depends on what no doubt I knew without knowing. I was expecting it without knowing, so without expecting, some will say. Yes, a bit like in the straight time that separates me from this verdict, the expected, feared, hoped-for verdict at the end of the trip to Latin America, on my return from Buenos Aires, Santiago de Chile, and Sao Paulo, where one knows nothing of the future of what is coming before the throw of the dice, or rather the shot fired at the temple in Russian roulette. So what? Who does this recommencement without precedent look like if still it expects a return? What resurrection is not the right word. But resurrection is not the right word. Neither the first nor the second resurrection St. Paul and Augustine talk to me about. Too obvious, that's my age, true enough. Know enough, more than enough. It's obvious about the truth you're so attracted to, the truth as a history of veils. What fatigue, exhaustion, proofs tire truth, as Braque said, more or less. That's why I've gone so far to wait for the verdict, the tropics, from St. James, Santiago, to St. Paul, Sao Paulo, maybe with a view not to return. But fatigue still doesn't mean anything in this case. Like the as if just now. You still don't know the fatigue I'm talking about. The exhaustion of this fatigue will gain its meaning tomorrow, perhaps, from the truth that engenders it, and when one has understood what it means, for someone like me at the moment when he is dreaming of writing it in Spanish, one of his forgotten ancestral languages, from the bottom of the map of the world, what, to be fatigued, yes, fatigued of the truth, voila, fatigued like truth, exhausted from knowing it for too long, that history of the veil, and all the folds, plis, explications, complications, explicitations of its revelations of unveilings. If you only knew how fatigued I feel at these revelations and unveilings, how many I have to put up with, how badly I put up with them, when they are to do not only with opening onto this or that, but unto the veil itself, a veil beneath the veil, like the thing itself to be unburied. It's too old for me, you see, too old like me, that truth, for my old age is measured by the age of that veil, however young I remain and green and naive. I am weary, weary, weary of the truth and of the truth as untruth of a being there, a Dasein, that is, each time in the truth and the untruth, in der Wahrheit und Unwahrheit, co-originarily in truth and untruth, in uncovering and recovering, unveiling and veiling, Unterlung, Verlung, dissimulation or withdrawal, Verborgenheit, and non-withdrawal, Unverborgenheit, of the opening, Erschlossenheit, weary of this opposition that is not an opposition, of revelation as veiling, vice versa, Wahrheit, Unwahrheit, Entdecktheit, Verborgenheit, as a fortiori of all its supposed derivatives, such as truth as accord, concord, or adequate correspondence, Übereinstimmung, and so on, und so weiter et passim. You must understand me, you see, and know what it is to be weary in this case, to be weary of a figure and its truth, of a strophe, a trope, and the folds of the said truth when it plays itself out with so many veils, infinite weariness. What do you expect? I want to enter all. Protest, attestation, testament, last will, manifesto against the shroud. I no longer want to write on the veil. Do you hear write on the veil? Or on the subject of the veil, around it or in its folds, under its authority or under its law, in a word, neither on it nor under it, with other Schleiermarsches of all sorts. I have used and abused the truth, as untruth, of course, come, e passuim, and of revelation and unveiling as veiling, of course, in so many languages. Go and see if I'm lying, fed up with veils and sails. Where do I still get, and from what distance, the force and the desire to come from far behind to have finished with it and precipitate the verdict? Precipitate it without end, and precipitate imminence until the end of time. Sails, la voilure, will have clothed my entire history, veils and sails of every sex and gender, more ample than any veiling, voilage, of my texts, which have, however, done nothing other than try to enfold them in turn and pocket them, to put the whole history of our culture, like a pocket handkerchief, in a pocket, but with a view to putting yet another handkerchief on top, bigger and smaller than anything, shedding tears beyond being, save what? Save whom? You're not even leaving anyone the right to claim that veil still has something to hide for you, and that it will suffice for you to have done with the veil to have access to the other thing itself, that cool's safe and intact. You'd be merely repeating the scene you're trying to look, as though you're saying farewell to, making us into your witness from so high and so far. Save that something else already really had to be at work, something else that this so old history of veils, that tiresome, tireless, tired-out history which I'm leaving behind me and which is running after me, a history that I knew, that I will have known too well how to do. Do too well, there's the fault, begin to do too well. Exhaustion, épuisement, that's all you can say. Épuisement does not only recall the water and the well, le puits, of truth, it brings us back to the pit, the chimney or the mine shaft, the hole, puiteux, that is, if we are to believe them, to what a veil is always destined to dissimulate, in the place of the thing itself. So it's not your épuisement that will save you from the veil. But I'm not exhausted at all, myself. I'm as young as can be, as though on the eve of a resurrection that has not yet spoken its name. You still don't know me by my name. I am only tired of the veil. It is the veil that is exhausted for me, in my place. It has stolen my name from me, I am pretending to confess, failing to have been able to do too well what is beginning to get a bit much with veils of all sorts, as if apparently the fate of humanity, of so-called humanity supposedly born, with shame, reticence, Verhaltenheit, nudity, evil knowledge, the knowledge of evil, the tree of knowledge, sin, fall, or Verfallen. Therefore the veil, as though the fate of humanity were again going to depend on whoever holds power over women about the veil. And I'm not just talking about an abusive interpretation of the Quran. St. Paul had something to do with it. We'll have to talk some more about him, and what I admire most in Nietzsche is his lucidity about Paul. Except then, I no longer know what, not yet who, but what we needed, on return from the ends of the earth and life, something else which would have an impact, fair dat, expected at its date and singular like an absolutely unforeseeable verdict, Absolutely, that is with no relation to foresight, nor therefore to sight. Life or death question, but one that is decided otherwise than by tearing, bursting, lifting, folding, unfolding, anything like veil. This coming would have to come from elsewhere, at its date like an operation of the other, entrusted to the other, in the other's hand, contrary to prostheses, glasses, lenses, and other lasers. But what place are they still taking, these old prostheses? In short, we'd have had our fill, we'd have had enough, satis, saturation, satire, etc. If I understand aright, enough of inheriting, or what comes to the same thing of bequeathing. As for inheriting, a single question today, I see no other, that of knowing whether, and by what right, at the origin and the end of right, knowing whether you will continue, survive, persecute, hunt, hound, knowing whether, and at the end of the day, by what right, you will overload the others, become yours, with your own death, the mourning of your body in ash, or buried with your own winding sheet until the presumed end of time, with the imprint of your face on the linen of a shroud, until the end of time, as someone will already have always done. Break with this one without leaving a trace, not even a trace of departure, not even the seal of a break. Voila, the only possible decision, voila, the absolute suicide, and the first meaning there can be in letting the other live, in letting the other be, without even counting on the slightest profit from this lifting of veil or shroud. Not even want a departure without shroud and in fire, not far from Tierra del Fuego, not even leave them my ashes. Blessing of the one who leaves without leaving an address. No longer be oneself or have oneself, c'est savoir. Voila, the truth without truth that is looking for me at the end of the world. Do one's mourning for truth, don't make truth one's mourning, and the mourning of ipseity itself, but, or therefore, without wearing or making anyone else wear mourning, and without truth ever suffering itself, I mean truth in itself, if there ever was any. Textile, tactile, talif. Tear my talif away from any story of the eye, from the theft of absolute usure. For after all, before the experience of what remains to be seen, my reference cloth was neither a veil nor a canvas, une toile, but a shawl. A prayer shawl I like to touch more than to see, to caress every day, to kiss without even opening my eyes, or even when it remains wrapped in a paper bag into which I stick my hand at night, eyes closed. And it is not an article of clothing, the talif, although one wears it, sometimes right against one's skin. Voila. Another skin, but one incomparable to any other skin, to any possible article of clothing. It veils or hides nothing, it shows or announces no thing, it promises the institution of nothing. Before seeing or knowing, le voir ou le savoir, before foreseeing or foreknowing, it is worn in memory of the law. You still have to see it in another way for that. Have it to yourself, have oneself, savoir that skin, and see it indeed. It will be your fringe, and when you see it, you will remember all Yahweh's commandments. You will carry them out. When one cannot read the original language, one rapidly loses oneself in translations, veils, fringes, or clothing, then panels, wings, corners. It will be your fringe when you see it, he says, or other translation, when you have this fringe, you will look at it. Or again, it is for you in fringe, you will see it. And you will memorize all the orders of IHVH, and you will do them. Adonai. So there would be on your site, see, look, an appropriation to you, you will have, for you, a taking possession. But this is the property, the for self, that at bottom does not belong and is there only to recall the commandments. This coming to self of the shawl, every man having his own talif. That's a necessary condition for the sight of the shawl. You will see this fringe, you will look at it, but only with a view to recalling oneself to the law. It will be your fringe, yours, and when you see it, you will remember the law. You will be recalled to the law by the foreself of the shawl, as if everyone discovered his own shawl to his own sight, and right on his own body, but only with a view of hearing and recalling the law, of recalling oneself to it, or of recalling it to oneself. And so to do more or something different through money than seeing, each time assigned to the absolute secret of a shawl, which can of course at time for prayer say the precepts be lent, but not exchanged and especially not become the property of someone else. The secret of the shawl envelops one single body. One might think that it is woven for this one body proper, or even by it, from which it seems to emanate, like an intimate secretion, but this is less through having engendered it thus right up close to oneself than through having already opened it or given birth into the divine word that will have preceded it. For a secretion, as is well known, is also what separates, discerns, dissociates, dissolves the bond, holds to the secret. One says, my shawl, only by obeying Yahweh's order, and by beginning to wonder, who am I? I who have already said, here I am. What is the self? My shawl. Mine was white first, completely white, only white, virgin, and without those black or blue stripes that are printed, it seems to me, on almost all the taliffs in the world. It was in any case the only white taliff in my family. It was given to me by my mother's father, Moses, like a sign of having been chosen. But why? I say it was white because with time it is going a little yellow. I do not know why, but after I left the house in El Biar where I had left it, my father borrowed it from me for a few years. It is true that he still had reason to wear it, and he took it across the Mediterranean at the time of the Exodus. After his death, I took it back as though I were inheriting it a second time. I hardly ever wear it. Is wear the right word? Do you wear this thing? Does it need it? Does it not carry off en porte before being worn, porté? So I no longer wear it. I simply place my fingers or lips on it, almost every evening, except when I'm travelling to the ends of the earth, because like an animal it waits for me, well hidden in its hiding place, at home it never travels. I touch it without knowing what I am doing or asking in so doing, especially not knowing into whose hands I am entrusting myself, to whom I'm rendering thanks, but to know at least two things, which I invoke here for those who are foreign, get this paradox, even more ignorant, more foreign than I, to the culture of the Talif, this culture of shawl and not of veil, blessing and death. Blessing. First, for example, the Day of Atonement, and the etymology of the word kippur is interwoven, it seems to me, with the whole lexicon of the Talif. A father can thus bless his two sons, not his daughters. Daughters, women, and sisters are not in the same place in the synagogue. And moreover, they have no talif, and I'm thinking of this passage of Deuteronomy 22:5, in which it is said, just before the prescription of the fringes upon the four quarters of thy vesture, of the veil with which you veil yourself, that the woman will not wear the dress of a man, nor the man that of a woman, for whoever does so is an abomination for Yahweh your God. I can still see this father, but I cannot see him by definition, by situation. He blessed his two sons one day bigger than he, lifting with both arms his talif stretched above the two heads. Bigger than he, and one bigger than the other, the sons are stifling a little under the solemn protection, under the roof of that temple so close, during the interminable prayer, in what was called the Great Temple, an old mosque right in the middle of an Arab district, anciently Judeo-Arab, a mosque in the Spanish style, since become a mosque again. Death, then, for example, the same father buried, like all men, in his own talif. What would become of the one of my grandfather had given me if he did not know what he was doing when he chose a white one, and if he chose me for the choice of this white talif? The decision is not yet taken and will not be mine. Ashes after fire? Earth? Virgin soil with a burial in the white talif? I ought to have pretended to dictate this decision, but I've suspended it designedly. I've decided that the decision will not be mine. I've decided to dictate nothing as to my death, giving myself upon thus to the truth of the decision. A verdict is always the other. Life will have been so short, and someone is saying to me, close to me, inside me, something like, it is forbidden to be old, Rabbi Naaman of Breslau. If there had been one, what colour would have been the talif of someone who said, I am the truth and the life, I have come, they saw me not, I am the coming, etc., so long after another had said, first, here I am.